This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tragedy in Georgia today. Local authorities say at least 4 people have been killed and 9 others taken to the hospital following a shooting at a high school.
Law enforcement responded to reports of an active shooter Wednesday morning at Appalachia High School in Barrow County, about 50 miles northeast of Atlanta.
9 that have been taken to local hospitals with various injuries. Of those that are deceased, 2 are students and 2 are teachers here at the school. The priority right now for us within this investigation is to gather all the facts, to make sure that we're accurate with it, because this is a murder investigation.
The school released the students to their families following a hard lockdown. A suspect is in custody. Law enforcement identified him as 14-year-old Colt Gray, a student at the school. He's been charged with murder and will be tried as an adult. President Biden released a statement saying, quote, "Jill and I are mourning the deaths of those whose lives were cut short due to more senseless gun violence and thinking of all of the survivors whose lives are forever changed. We cannot continue to accept this as normal." Vice President Kamala Harris addressed the shooting during a campaign event in New Hampshire.
This is just a senseless tragedy on top of so many senseless tragedies. And it's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive. It's senseless. It is. We've got to stop it.
The mayor of Winder and the Georgia governor are both following the situation. Attorney General Merrick Garland said the FBI and ATF are on the scene, working with state, local, and federal partners to investigate.
Russia is allegedly meddling in this year's presidential election. Federal U.S. departments are now pressing charges against Russian individuals while trying to seize dozens of internet domains. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the story.
The government of Russia continued to use RT to direct disinformation and propaganda.
Multiple U.S. departments on Wednesday alleging that Russia is meddling in this year's presidential elections. The Department of Justice indicted 2 editors-in-chief for the Russian state-owned media outlet RT.
RT and its employees, including the defendants, implemented a nearly $10 million scheme to fund and direct a Tennessee-based company to publish and disseminate content deemed favorable to the Russian government.
The department alleges that the 2 individuals violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act. In return for the money, the Tennessee company allegedly created English content, which it then posted on Instagram, YouTube, X, and other platforms. The Treasury Department also sanctioned the 2 editors, plus 9 others, over the alleged meddling in the elections. RT responded with ridicule, saying 3 things are certain in life: death, taxes, and RT's interference in the U.S. elections. And separately from the actions against RT, the FBI and the Justice Department are also seeking court permission to seize 32 websites, so-called cyber squatter domains.
These websites were designed to appear to American readers as if they were major U.S. news sites like the Washington Post or Fox News. But in fact, they were fake sites.
The DOJ published examples of such sites. For example, this one, which appears to be a Washington Post article stating Middle East coalition of U.S. allies crumbles like a house of cards. Or another fake article reading "No more money, Kremlin will solve Ukraine's problem." The FBI is now working to take these sites down. The 2 indicted editors for RT remain at large. And Russian strikes hit the western city of Lviv early Wednesday. The city is located just 40 miles from the border with Poland. Poland is a NATO member and a member of the European Union. 4 of the 7 Ukrainian casualties were all members of the same family. The man being treated here is the father. Local officials say he lost his wife and 3 daughters. Almost 50 people are injured after the attack. The city's mayor described the destruction.
We can now clearly see that people from at least 6 houses require resettlement. 2 schools will not be open today. Many windows have been blown out.
Also in Ukraine today, but further east, close to Russia, 2 people died after an attack on a market in Donetsk.
The explosion was very powerful. We were at the market's office when it happened. We waited a moment, then came running. We saw 2 killed.
He added that 4 more had been injured. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The State Department confirmed today that China's Consul General in New York is no longer in office. The department said diplomat Huang Ping was not expelled and left after completing his scheduled rotation. The clarification came after New York Governor Kathy Hochul had said she asked for the Chinese diplomat to be expelled to send a message to the Chinese officials who worked with one of her former aides, Linda Sun. Sun was charged yesterday with being an unregistered agent of the Chinese regime. Here's State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller addressing the issue today.
Foreign interference, including attempts to influence through covert activities that should be registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act and are not registered are things that we take very seriously, as you saw by the action the Department of Justice took yesterday.
This comes after Linda Sun, former deputy chief of staff aide to Governor Hochul, and former Governor Cuomo was charged with conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's on top of other charges like alien smuggling, money laundering, and visa fraud. While working for state government, Sun influenced the messaging of high-level state officials. In the indictment, prosecutors allege that Sun blocked Taiwanese government representatives from communicating with officials, as well as obtained official New York State proclamations for Chinese state representatives without authorization. And on Capitol Hill, House Republicans plan to put forth a dozen bills to counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party and safeguard American interests. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is moving ahead with a foreign policy platform he unveiled earlier this summer.
China poses the greatest threat to global peace. Congress must keep our focus on countering China with every tool at our disposal. The House will be voting on a series of bills to empower the next administration to hit our enemies' economies on day one.
At least 12 bills related to countering the influence of the Chinese Communist Party are on the agenda for when Congress reconvenes next week.
Our goal is to have a significant package of China-related legislation signed into law by the end of this year. I'm very hopeful that much of this can be bipartisan.
Amongst those legislations is a bill that would restrict the Department of Homeland Security from funding universities that are receiving financing from the Chinese Communist Party.
It's an interconnected web of threats. I refer to it as a China-led axis composed of partner regimes in Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and even Cuba.
The End Chinese Dominance of Electric Vehicles in America Act would restrict clean vehicle tax credits only to those EVs with domestically manufactured batteries. The Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act would make it harder for foreign nationals to own farmland in the U.S. And the Protecting Innovation and Economic Security from the CCP would establish a China-focused division in the Justice Department. It's important to note that according to Ad Impact, during this campaign cycle for the general elections, there have been at least 171 campaign ads related to countering China, both in congressional and presidential races. 2/3 of those ads posted by Democrats. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Severe heat will scorch parts of the U.S. from Florida to California this week. Temperatures are set to hit triple digits in several areas. NTD's Christina Corona has more.
This week, the nation is bracing for a severe heat wave with extreme temperatures anticipated to affect 32 major cities. Some areas are expected to exceed 105 degrees starting Wednesday. A heat advisory has been issued for South Florida, including Miami-Dade, Broward, and the Florida Keys, where feels like temperatures could soar to 110 degrees Wednesday afternoon. In Southern California, an excessive heat warning is in effect for much of the region, with temperatures expected to exceed 100 100 degrees starting Thursday. However, residents looking to cool off at popular beaches are being cautioned to stay away. Health officials have issued warnings after bacterial levels at several Los Angeles County beaches, including Mother's Beach in Marina del Rey, and areas around Santa Monica Pier were found to exceed health standards. In Arizona, Phoenix broke yet another heat record on Tuesday, with temperatures reaching at least 100 degrees for 100 consecutive days since May 27th. If your area is impacted by dangerous heat, protect yourself by staying hydrated and cool. Consider cooling off at centers, libraries, or large grocery stores. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Vice President Kamala Harris spoke in New Hampshire Wednesday afternoon. She revealed a new part of her economic plan focusing on small businesses. NTD's Jason Blair brings us the latest.
In Portsmouth, Vice President Kamala Harris proposed her new plan to, quote, support small businesses and invest in entrepreneurs.
Part of my plan is we will expand the tax deduction for startups to $50,000. Second, my plan will help existing small businesses grow. We will provide low and no interest loans to small businesses that want to expand.
She says she wants to make it easier to open a small business by removing hurdles and creating support. And her campaign says Harris has the goal of creating 25 million new business applications in her first term as president if elected. According to AP, since Biden took office, about 19 million of those applications have been filed. And the Granite State is a bit of a deviation from her recent focus on battleground states such as Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Poll averages for New Hampshire are showing Harris up by 5% over former President Trump. The Trump campaign responded to Harris's announcement to help small businesses, saying in a statement, quote, why hasn't she done it during her 4 years as vice president? After the Portsmouth event, Harris will travel to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she is expected to stay until the debate between her and Trump on September 10th. Trump is also visiting Pennsylvania this week. On Wednesday, he'll be appearing at a Fox News town hall in Harrisburg. The event will be moderated by Sean Hannity and is scheduled to air at 9 p.m. Eastern. This is following his most recent visit to the highly sought-after state last Friday at a rally in Johnstown. Poll averages by Real Clear Politics are showing Trump and Harris pretty much tied in the state. Back to you.
The fight for control of the Senate is intensifying as campaigns hit full stride and voters start to eye races more closely. While Republicans have been favored to reclaim the Senate, Vice President Harris replacing President Biden has shaken up the dynamics for both parties. NTD's Daniel Monahan breaks down the key contests that could shape America's future government.
As Election Day approaches, 5 states have emerged as crucial battlegrounds: Montana, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. Although the GOP's chances of flipping multiple seats have narrowed, Decision Desk HQ still gives Republicans a 70% chance to win the Senate. Here are 5 of the most likely seats to flip. Montana remains the linchpin for Senate control. If Republicans win there, they likely regain the Senate majority. Former Navy SEAL officer Tim Sheehy is challenging incumbent Senator John Tester in the race. The latest Real Clear polling averages show Sheehy leading by 5 points. In Nevada, Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen is favored over Republican challenger and Purple Heart recipient Sam Brown. Financial challenges have limited Brown's reach. The latest Real Clear polling averages show Rosen with an over 10-point lead. Over to Pennsylvania, where businessman David McCormick is up against a formidable opponent in Senator Bob Casey. McCormick's campaign has stumbled recently, with several high-profile gaffes hurting his chances. Despite having a well-funded campaign, McCormick trails Casey by 3 points in the latest Real Clear polling averages. With Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes at stake, this race will remain highly visible, but McCormick faces an uphill battle against the deeply rooted Casey name. In Michigan, the open Senate seat presents another critical opportunity for Republicans. Former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers is challenging Representative Alyssa Slotkin in a state that hasn't elected a Republican senator in 3 decades. Slotkin's fundraising advantage could be a decisive factor. The latest Real Clear polling averages show Slotkin with a nearly 5-point lead. Ohio remains a key target for the GOP. Senator Sherrod Brown is seeking a 4th term in a state that Trump won by 8 points in the last 2 elections. Republican challenger entrepreneur Bernie Moreno recently launched a $25 million ad campaign, with additional pro-Moreno groups spending $8 million last week alone, an amount expected to increase weekly. The latest Real Clear polling averages show Brown with about a 5-point lead over Moreno. Overall, races are heating up and people are getting ready for a fierce final stretch. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Next, a historic number of illegal immigrants have moved into the U.S. We take a look at how the surge will change the American economy.
The U.S. is experiencing the largest immigration surge since the Great Wave of the late 1800s, the Congressional Budget Office says. An overwhelming majority, around 6.5 million, are illegal immigrants.
There were fewer babies born in the United States last year, less than 3.6 million, than there were illegal immigrants coming into this country.
Population researcher Steve Mosier says 10% of those babies are the babies of illegal immigrants.
I'm all in favor of more children, all right? I'm all in favor of population growth. I think a population decline leads to economic collapse. It leads to societal collapse.
Mosier says this immigration may help the U.S. with its historically low fertility rate, but he says it's better for citizens to have more babies than illegal immigrants. Census Bureau data suggests most illegal immigrants are young, have a low level of education, and are ready to work. These immigrants compete with native-born Americans for low-paying jobs, and this is likely to keep wages relatively low. The jobs most commonly worked by illegal immigrants are as construction workers, housekeepers, cooks, and janitors. The overwhelming majority come from Latin American countries like Venezuela, Mexico, and Honduras. Many are also from China, Russia, India, or Africa. Their top destinations are California, Texas, New York, New Jersey, and Florida. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the migrant surge will boost federal revenues by $1.2 trillion over a decade. It says the surge will boost economic activity and the migrants themselves will pay taxes.
And over to Europe, Britain has rejected calls for an asylum treaty with the European Union. This a day after 12 migrants died trying to make a perilous ocean journey from France to England. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us.
Britain has rejected proposals to be part of a European Union plan on asylum. Instead, Britain reiterated its own plans to tackle the criminal gangs behind the UK's illegal immigration crisis. This comes after the French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin called for a treaty following the deaths of 12 migrants who tried to cross the English Channel on Tuesday.
Darmanin's proposal could see migrants claim UK asylum from within the EU without needing to make the dangerous journey. But this is unlikely to happen. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has indicated he'd prefer to send illegal immigrants back to the EU. Despite the deaths of Tuesday, Wednesday morning saw several dozen more migrants board a crowded boat on the French coast of Wimereux. French patrol boats watched as the flimsy boat laboured through the seas. The coastal town's mayor, Jean-Luc Dubael, is also calling for French and British officials to do more to stem the number of migrants attempting the journey. He asked, why do they want to go to Britain? They can ask for asylum in France, but he said they want to go to Britain instead. So Dubael says something is drawing them to choose the UK over France. It echoes Darmanin's remarks. Darmanin condemned the people smugglers, but he pointed to what he sees as Britain's loosely regulated job market. He said migrants are attracted to Britain because they can often work without papers and are rarely deported. Starmer said that in the first 2 months in power, the government has deported over 400 people who have no right to be in Britain. However, UK government figures show that in the last 7 days alone, more than 2,000 people have arrived in Britain on small boats. So far this year, nearly 22,000 people have made the dangerous journey. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Another devastating fire in a historic church in France this week. Police have arrested a suspect, but the incident highlights a concerning trend in the country. 39 fires in churches have been reported in France since January last year. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the story.
A devastating fire erupted early Monday at the Church of the Immaculate Conception in Saint-Omer in northern France. The fire started at about 4:30 a.m. and led to the collapse of the church's steeple. That was despite efforts of 90 firefighters who managed to contain the fire by morning. Police arrested a suspect on Monday night who was already culpable for vandalism. This case is not isolated and authorities have observed a trend. Since January 2023, 39 churches have faced arson attacks. This disturbing trend seems relatively recent and appears to have started with the Notre Dame Cathedral fire in 2018. According to historian Anne Brassier, there has been a wave of anti-Christian acts in France in recent years.
More and more churches close their doors during the day, only to open during mass hours. That's also the case in Italy. People don't enter churches the way they used to do it. It's because people fear. They fear not only fires, but they fear theft. All these thieves know that these statues or artifacts are very beautiful, and so they want to steal them and put them on the market.
There are roughly 42,000 Catholic churches in France. According to official figures, 900 incidents including vandalism, theft, or desecration target Christian religious buildings daily. And it's often difficult for authorities to identify the perpetrators.
Burning a Catholic church is, after all, the worst desecration act there can be. This bruises the souls of all those who go to this church to pray. I don't think we can solve this problem except by paying attention to who's walking in the street. We need a political response, but it simply doesn't exist.
There have been warnings from Catholic groups and associations about the lack of intervention from police and the lack of government fundings regarding these incidents. On the other hand, the Notre Dame Cathedral arson seems to have shaken the public opinion enough in France for some churches to find funds for construction works and repairs. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And joining us now to explore how Chinese consulates are involved in CCP spy operations on American soil are two guests. Nan Su is a senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times, and Jimmy Quinn is a national security correspondent for the National Review. Now, thank you both so much for joining us. Great to see you both again. And so I want to start with you. From your research, what is the role of Chinese consulates when it comes to the Chinese regime's overseas spy operations?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tiffany, for having me. Now, the Chinese consulate, for a long time, many years, they have been reaching out to the local different Chinese group, like overseas Chinese alumni groups, Chinese student groups, local culture groups, for example, certain peoples from certain region. They will speak different dialects, and so they form some of the local cultural groups. And what they have done is they will have this group, after these groups form, they will keep the tight connection with only 3 or 4, basically very small group of top leaders. They know the true relation between their group and Chinese consulate, and that's how the Chinese consulate control all these different groups.
And expanding on that, Jimmy, we saw in 2020 when the Chinese consulate in Houston shut down videos showing personnel burning papers or documents in the back. Now, from a national security perspective, what is your reaction to those videos?
Well, it's important to know that the Chinese Communist Party's long arm reaches right into American cities, and the Chinese consulates are directing the hand of CCP repression. So the role that they play is that they are engaging with community members, as Nan said, and exerting the party's malign influence over politics, over community organizations. It's all part of the party's United Front strategy, where it tries to create a fake civil society that Beijing controls, and in this case, on foreign soil, a violation of American sovereignty. So this goes hand in hand with other PRC and CCP agencies, whether we're talking about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of State Security. It's all part of the same united front ecosystem.
And Nansu, to your earlier point, right now, the fall semester has started at many universities across the nation. Talk to us about the Chinese regime's influence over the student and cultural associations on campus and what that looks like.
Well, superficially, they just look like the student organization, like a Chinese cultural organization or overseas Chinese student organization. Their routine job is just like a social gathering, maybe an annual barbecue. But once a while, when the important Chinese leader visit the United States, then this, the leaders of this student group will ask these students to go to the streets and wave the flags, of the Chinese regime's flag, doing all these kind of things. And for the students, sometimes the Chinese consulate will invite the leaders of these student groups to go to Chinese consulate to conduct political studies together. And in the past, some of the Chinese consulate even published the news of all these student leaders doing political studies in Chinese consulate. They use this kind of news to show that this is, the leadership of these students among Chinese students, and also for these Chinese students when, this is their ticket when they finish their study in the U.S. and go back to China. This is their ticket to get a better job or better business opportunities.
And Jimmy, you mentioned what's known as China's United Front Work Group, or an overseas propaganda arm for the CCP. You've been covering that for years. How does that tie into what we're seeing here, especially in regards to New York Governor Kathy Hochul's former top aide, Linda Sun?
So it goes all the way back to the community organizations that Nan mentioned just a bit earlier. These are kind of the connective tissue that the consulates use, and they mobilize people through those community organizations, which have ties back to China via other United Front organs, such as the All China Federation for Returned Overseas Chinese. And it's through that that the consulates and other party and state agencies exercise their malign influence and conduct operations where they repress overseas populations. So one example of this is the famous Chinese police station case, where there is an illegal law enforcement outpost operated by the Ministry of Public Security right in the middle of Manhattan. It's all of these different agencies working together in tandem. It's not only the official ones with the PRC label on the front door. It's also organizations that most people have never heard of that exert vast influence over American politics and society.
And Nansu, given all that we've been talking about, zooming out a bit here, how does the Chinese regime recruit and then turn people into, say, agents of influence and then put them into influential positions?
They either offer all these business opportunities directly to these people, or maybe their direct families. I'll give you an example now. Especially this year, we have an election that's coming. Give you an example now. Because whatever the tactic used by the Chinese Communist regime, they have been all tested in Taiwan. Now, January of this year, Taiwan had a presidential election. Now, just prior to the election, what the Chinese Communist regime did was they basically invite all the local people, local leaders, like your organization leaders or your local elected officials. All you need to do is just buy a two-way ticket, from Taiwan to China. Once you reach there, once you reach to any airport you want, and then once you get there, from that point on, everything is free. Good service, hotel, transportation, food, everything. And of course, they will ask you to go back to Taiwan and influence the group around you to make them vote for the candidate that Beijing preferred. So that's what's happening.
And Jimmy, you mentioned that noodle shop in Manhattan that doubled as a police station in Manhattan. What are some other examples of the extent of the local influence this CCP recruitment has?
Sure. So the Department of Justice has actually given the public a lot of information through the indictment of alleged Chinese agents in recent years. There is a recent case up in Boston where a man who was part of United Front affiliated groups is now being prosecuted for his activities to surveil and repress dissidents and Hong Konger freedom advocates. And it turns out that he was pretty frequently in touch with the Chinese consulate in New York. So it's not only Linda Sun, and now Linda Sun is the biggest and most egregious example of this, where it seems that the former consul general, Huang Ping, was directly involved in an effort to subvert the New York governor's office. They're targeting people on American soil, including American citizens and residents. It's a flagrant violation of U.S. sovereignty. It's a violation of people's human rights. And it's an issue that, frankly, should have been addressed long ago, long before we learned about this most recent case, because previously there were grounds for the expulsion of Chinese diplomats out of the consulate general in New York. But I guess better late than never.
And expanding on that, Nansu, given this local level targeting that we're seeing here, what is the solution to this?
Well, first of all, solution is I think U.S. government really should pay attention to this. Now, regardless which level of government you belong to, the Chinese government's interest is always there. So the local government should be highly alert for what's coming. Now, I think the New York governor just made an excellent example. He actually basically reached out to the State Department, asked the State Department to expel the Consul General from China in New York. So I think this is really giving a good example. I think a lot of officials need to learn from this.
And Jimmy, same question. In your view, what is the solution here?
The State Department and the U.S. government really need to do a lot to warn Americans about the threats of malign CCP influence at the state and local levels. There have been some efforts by the U.S. intelligence community to do this. In 2 years, there was a document that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence put out warning about United Front operations. But unfortunately, as the Biden administration has pursued this diplomatic outreach to China after the spy balloon incident, they've actually encouraged subnational interactions with the communist regime. They've encouraged sister city relationships. They've told American students that they should go study in China despite the level 3 travel warning for Americans who want to visit the country. So there needs to be a tougher line that the State Department takes. And even though it seems that the former Consul General Huang Ping has left his post in New York, at least according to the State Department and Governor Hochul, the State Department claims that he was not expelled. It claims that he was on a regularly scheduled rotation, that he'd been here a few years, and that he was ready to leave as part of that rotation. It appears to be a face-saving exercise where they don't want to admit to convincing the Chinese to send Huang Ping away. And I think it has to do a lot with the fact that President Biden sent his climate envoy, John Podesta, to Beijing this week. It's a face-saving exercise, and they're pulling their punches here at the expense of a robust defense of American sovereignty and human rights.
Quite concerning indeed, but enlightening conversation. Nansu and Jimmy Quinn, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
A survivor's harrowing tale featured in a Wednesday press conference by the organization Stop Organ Harvesting by CCP in Washington, D.C. Chen Pei-ming is joined by several prominent human rights activists to share his story. NTD's Sam Wong has more on the story.
The world's first known survivor of China's state-sponsored forced organ removal spoke out on Wednesday. His testimony comes in response to claims from the Chinese Communist Party questioning his account.
Today, as I stand here, I may appear normal. I walk and speak normally, but in reality, I can never return to the person I once was.
In his previous testimonies, 59-year-old Chen Pei-ming recalled being forcibly injected by prison guards and waking up shackled to a hospital bed. Medical exams suggest part of his liver went missing, along with a portion of his lung. He was left with a 13-inch long incision on the side of his chest and chronic pain.
The 35-centimeter scar on my left rib cage throbs with every beat of my pulse. And with each beat, the pain is unbearable.
Experts said the CCP's reply confirmed a few things. Namely, Chen was sentenced for 8 years due to his faith. And a hospital performed the surgery without his consent, which left a scar on his body.
Well, they confirmed it. I mean, it's now for the doctors. We've been through several years now of independent experts looking at this case, and they say some things are missing.
Chen is one of many who have suffered under the Chinese regime's nationwide persecution campaign against Falun Gong, a spiritual practice known for its house benefits and moral teachings. Since July 1999, practitioners in China have been subjected to incarceration, forced labor, torture, and even death. A U.S. State Department report suggests an untold number of them have had their organs forcibly removed to supply the Chinese regime's billion-dollar transplant industry.
It's solidified my own instinct and belief after reviewing his file, after meeting him, after seeing his scar, after seeing the scans, that he indeed was a victim of forced organ harvesting.
Back in June, the U.S. House unanimously passed the Falun Gong Protection Act, a bill to sanction anyone involved in Beijing's practice of forced organ harvesting. The legislation has been introduced to the upper chamber by Senator Marco Rubio. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wang, NTD News.
The New York Times last month published a series of stories alleging abuse within Shenyang Performing Arts. The articles accuse the arts company, whose mission is to revive traditional culture through classical Chinese dance, of coercive practices. But many Shenyang artists have spoken out against the articles, saying the paper misrepresents them. So what's the real story? The Epoch Times' Yania Kellick sat down with those who are most affected to hear their stories. Here's a trailer of the program.
I remember that night, we sat down and started writing the experiences that they've been through over the years, well into like midnight. How could this be happening? Like an environment that has given us so much and helped us grow so much, like why is it getting tarnished like this? We really wanted to speak up and we wanted to, like share our stories.
Do you have a sense of what elite training looks like?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's this New York Times article that's come out that has painted an extremely different picture. How do you react to that?
I feel everything was taken out of context, to be honest.
You have this wonderful group of people with personalities and their interests, their hobbies. Why would I willingly choose to stay somewhere like that and for over a decade? Jumping is easy, right? They watch you, but getting up, you watch them.
Jumping up.
No, you watch them. You watch, because
What's the same for us?
They have steps. They go like this.
Yeah.
I think we're done here.
We're actually pretty crazy.
Okay, thank you.
Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty to discuss today, but let's start in the NFL, where the Buffalo Bills are planning to start Damar Hamlin at safety, his first since suffering cardiac arrest last year. Now, is this considered a permanent move?
Yeah, I say that because he started 13 games for the Bills in 2022 after injuries to starters Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. But now Poyer has since signed with Miami. Hyde is still an unsigned free agent. But unlike 2 years ago, this doesn't look like he's only starting until someone returns. Last year he played in 5 games. He didn't start any of them. Of course, he's only played 3 years in the league. This is kind of a natural progression for young players. Now that said, his return from cardiac arrest, totally remarkable. Certainly a feel-good story from the NFL. I mean, it's been more than 18 months since he was essentially revived on the football field in front of a live TV audience. And this could be part of a different Buffalo Bills team than the one that's won the division 4 straight years. Not only are they replacing their 2 starting safeties, they're also replacing their 2 starting wide receivers and a number of other players. It's part of an overall rebuild. They still have Josh Allen at quarterback, so I still think they'll be a playoff team.
And the NFL season starts tomorrow night with the two-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in action, looking to win their third in a row, something that's never been done. What are the bookmakers saying?
You know, they have the Chiefs as the favorites to win. According to ESPN Bet, the Chiefs are at 5-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. San Francisco is right behind them at 6-1, who the Chiefs beat in last year's Super Bowl. And behind those two in third is the Baltimore Ravens, who the Chiefs actually play tomorrow night in the opener. Now, I like the team the Chiefs have this year, at least on paper. They still have Patrick Mahomes. They still return a number of players from that great defense. They still have head coach Andy Reid. I'm not picking them to win it this year simply because winning 3 in a row is just too difficult. The reason I say that is, one, injuries. Football is obviously a very violent game. You have to be kind of fortunate in that area with their star players. But also, the postseason format. It's a one and done at every single round. You have one bad game, you're out. This is not like the best of 7 format in baseball, basketball, or hockey. And I think that's a big reason why, because in those sports, you have winners or champions that go 3, 4, even longer years at the top. In the NFL, the Chiefs are the 9th team to win back-to-back Super Bowl titles. Of the previous 8, no one has even got to the Super Bowl the following season. It's that tough of a format.
Well, shifting gears to Olympic news, Australian breakdancer Rachel Gunn, who gained some negative notoriety after her performance this summer, said a lot of the responses were due to people not being familiar with breaking. This is according to a recent TV interview.
Yeah, I think this is why breakdancing is not going to be brought back for the 2028 Olympics. At least it's not scheduled to be at this point. It's too open to interpretation. She pointed out how much success she had in Australia, where she was the top-ranked B girl 3 of the last 4 years. Yet her performance in the Olympics was certainly not well received by the judges. I mean, she competed 3 times in the round robin, where it's 1 against 1, and each judge cast a simple vote, one or the other. She lost by a combined score of 54-0. Not one judge had her winning any of the 3 matches, and really highlights of her moves, including her kangaroo dance and even her uniform, were ridiculed so much online that a petition that said she must have manipulated the Australian Olympic qualification process received more than 40,000 signatures before it was being taken down. So people just really couldn't see how she had made the Olympic team. Now, for her part, though, Gunn said it's unlikely she'll be competing anytime soon.
Well, looking at tennis news, England's Jack Draper won in straight sets today to advance to the semifinals. Now, he's done this without dropping a set here. Is he all of a sudden looking like a player who could win the title?
Yeah, for sure. He beat 10th-ranked Alex Jumur today in straight sets, like you mentioned. He's the first to reach the semis without dropping a set since 2020. In fact, Roger Federer won this event 5 straight times at one point, and he was never even able to do that. So Draper looks like another up-and-coming player. He's 22, he's ranked 25th, though that's going to go up after this tournament. Now tonight, we'll have 2 of the most anticipated matches of this event. Women's #1 ranked Iga Swiatek against 6th ranked American Jessica Pegula. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Then on the men's side, you've got top ranked Jannik Sinner against former U.S. Open champion Daniil Medvedev. That's going to be at 8:30 Eastern time. Those are both quarterfinal matches.
A lot to look for here, Dave. As always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.